This police dog refused to kill. The government marked him for deletion. The first time Darian saw the dog, it wasn't the scars that stopped him. It was the stillness. Not fear, not aggression, just awareness. A German shepherd, marked as K9 V117, stood at the back of the shelter crate like he was waiting for something or someone. Darian didn't know then that this retired military canine had once disobeyed a direct order and vanished off the map. They called him a glitch, a failure. But as Darian reached his hand through the bars, Kyle didn't flinch. He stepped forward. What started as a simple rescue turned into something darker. A USB drive. Footage that was never supposed to exist. Men in suits. A name whispered like a warning, Spectre. And then one night, Kyle stood in front of Darian's door, growling low, warning him this wasn't over. You think you know what loyalty is? Wait till you see why they tried to erase him. Ashbourne was the kind of place people forgot the moment they left. Hidden behind a thicket of leafless trees and barbed wire fencing just outside the edge of town, the decommission center didn't advertise its existence. It didn't need to. No one came here unless they had to, unless something needed to be erased. Once, this building had been a proud arm of the K9 Tactical Division, bustling with military dog handlers, late-night training drills, and rows of kennels echoing with sharp barks and commanding voices. Now, all of that was gone. What remained was a hollow shell of its former self-metal lockers rusted at the hinges, cracked fluorescent lights humming overhead, and the low, constant whir of old ventilation that smelled faintly of bleach and resignation. There were cages, of course, dozens of them. Most were filled with dogs pacing back and forth, some barking madly at any movement, some whining, some panting with their noses pressed against the bars, as if sheer desperation might force the door open. These were the hopeful ones, the ones who still believed someone might choose them, who hadn't yet figured out what decommissioned truly meant. But in the farthest corner of the facility, beyond the flickering light and the reach of casual glances, sat one cage that made no sound at all. Inside it lay Kyle. He didn't pace. He didn't bark. He didn't look at the other dogs or the people walking past. He just lay there, head low, eyes half open and fixed on nothing. If it weren't for the slow rise and fall of his ribs, someone might have thought he'd already died. His coat thick, dark, and matted in places, was once the mark of a prized working German shepherd. Now it clung to him like an old, forgotten uniform. His muscles remained lean, sculpted by the kind of discipline only military hands could mold. But something in his frame had collapsed, not physically, something deeper, his spirit, perhaps, or whatever was left of it. The cage bore no name, only a number, V177. It was stenciled in blocky, impersonal ink on a plastic card clipped to the door. No medical history, no behavioral notes, no name to soften the cold sterility of his existence. Just that one code. He wasn't a dog anymore. He was a designation. Staff walked past his cage with studied detachment. Some avoided even looking. Others, when asked, would shake their heads and mutter things like unfit, failed trials, or unstable. A few younger volunteers exchanged glances of unease when near him, whispering how he hadn't moved in days. No growls, no flinches. Not even when a metal pail dropped beside his cage last Thursday and clanged like a gunshot. "He's a shell," one of them had said quietly, almost respectfully, like he's already left. He hadn't touched his food in 3 days, not because he was picky, they assumed, but because nothing tasted like survival when the world had already decided you didn't belong in it. The clipboard on the break room fridge sealed his fate. Disposal list, Friday, 3:00 p.m., line 3, V117, final, no ceremony, no appeal. Just an administrative decision made in a stale office under humming lights by people who signed off without remembering the name of the handler who once trusted that dog with his life. There was something else in the cage, with Cale something no form or clipboard could document. It wasn't rage. It wasn't fear. It was older than both. A silence so absolute, so complete, that it wrapped itself around him like armor. The kind of silence you only see in those who've been through war and realize they're still inside it, long after the shooting stopped. The other dogs barked louder when visitors arrived. Some leapt up at the cage doors, tails wagging, tongues lolling, eager for any sign of attention. They still played their parts. Cale remained still. That morning, a family of 4 passed by his cage. A father carrying a leash, a mother with a brochure, 2 kids arguing over names for a dog they hadn't even met yet. When they reached Cale's cage, they fell silent. The father squinted at the placard. No info? A staff member hurried over. Oh, that one's not for adoption. Behavioral issue. Final list. The family moved on quickly. The kids didn't even glance back. A janitor swept the corridor moments later. His mop passed Cale's cage with the same indifference he gave every cage on the final list. The man didn't see the faint flick of Cale's ear or the way his eyes followed the motion, not out of interest but calculation. He was still aware, still waiting, not for food, not even for freedom. Something else. Someone. And in that heavy, humming silence, as the morning sun strained to break through the grime-caked windows, something shifted in the air, imperceptibly small, but undeniable. Out front, a truck engine cut out. Boots stepped onto gravel. A man in a worn flannel coat adjusted his collar against the wind and looked up at the building he didn't plan to walk into. Not yet. But he would. And when he did, everything would change. Cale didn't know it, not consciously, but his ears lifted just slightly, as if some forgotten instinct stirred in the back of his mind, as if, buried deep beneath the silence, something had just taken a breath. The sun had barely cleared the rooftops when Darian Holt pushed open the rusted door of Rusty's diner and stepped into the scent of burned coffee and overcooked bacon. The place hadn't changed in years. Same cracked vinyl booths, same old jukebox that hadn't worked since 2017. It was the kind of place where no one asked questions unless you owed them money. Darian didn't owe anyone anything. Not anymore. He slid into the farthest booth in the corner, his back to the wall, habit carved deep into muscle memory. His jacket, once military issue, now bore oil stains and the kind of wear that came from more than just work. It came from surviving in silence. On the table, a chipped mug filled halfway with coffee that tasted like ash and regret. Outside, Ashbourne moved in slow motion. A town stuck between yesterday and nowhere. Darian preferred it that way. No parades, no noise, just the familiar drone of truck tires on gravel and the occasional knock of an engine that didn't want to start. He ran Holt's garage 2 blocks over. More a graveyard of scrap than a functioning shop these days, but people still brought him things to fix. Broken transmissions, busted compressors, generators that coughed more than they hummed. Machines were easier than people. Machines didn't lie. They didn't ask why you talked in your sleep or flinched at fireworks. They just broke, and sometimes, if you were lucky, you put them back together. He wasn't fixing anything today. Not really. Darian sat with his mug cooling in his hands and stared at nothing in particular when a gust of wind pushed the door open just wide enough to let something flutter across the floor, a torn, folded piece of paper, weather-stained and creased. It stopped near his boot. He bent down without thinking, picked it up. A flyer, official-looking, government typeface, K-9 transfer and public viewing. Below that smaller print, retired units available for civilian adoption. And there, in red marker, circled like someone had meant for him to see it. Disposal list. Final clearance. Friday, 3:00 p.m. The word hit harder than it should have. Disposal. It didn't say euthanasia. It didn't say deactivation. It said disposal, like junk metal, like trash, like something you used up and tossed because it stopped being useful. Darian stared at it, fingers tightening around the page. He didn't believe in signs, but the word scratched something raw behind his ribs. He'd seen that word before on crates of burned-out drones, on field reports, on body bags tagged in the wrong color. He looked out the window. The wind had picked up. Leaves spun past like small, confused ghosts. He folded the flyer once, then again, slower this time, and slid it into his coat pocket. He didn't know why. The last thing he needed was a trip out to the edge of town to watch some sad-eyed dogs press themselves against cold steel bars. But something about the silence of that word, the way it had been circled in red like a wound, dug its way under his skin. Back at the garage, the day unfolded in gray, uneventful motions. A carburetor he didn't want to finish. A voicemail from a supplier he never returned. The heater in the corner coughed to life, sputtered, and then died. Darian stared at it for a moment too long before grabbing his keys. The old truck grumbled awake like it didn't appreciate being disturbed. The drive to the Ashbourne K-9 facility was quiet. Too quiet. Rain threatened on the horizon, heavy clouds rolling in slow and mean. The road curved like it wasn't sure it wanted to be followed, and the pine trees along the shoulder leaned just slightly, as if eavesdropping on whoever dared to pass. Darian didn't turn on the radio. He didn't need background noise to fill the spaces. He had enough ghosts to do that already. One mission. That's all it took to turn your life into a sealed file and your friends into gravestones. Afghanistan, an alley, the girl who screamed, the dog who didn't come back. He gripped the wheel tighter. By the time the facility came into view, a low concrete building half sunken into the earth like it was ashamed of itself. Darian wasn't sure why he'd come. Curiosity? Guilt? Something worse? The parking lot was already half full, families getting out of minivans, couples with checklists, kids with bright eyes pointing at photos on the adoption board near the door. Hopeful people. He pulled into the last row, killed the engine, didn't move. A crow landed on the edge of the facility's roof and stared down like it knew something he didn't. Darian stared back. Then he opened the door. The wind caught his coat as he stepped out, pulling the folded flyer halfway up from his pocket before it fell again, brushing against his leg like a reminder. Disposal. The word still lingered, like smoke in a burned room. He didn't know what he was about to walk into. But as the glass doors hissed open and the fluorescent lights flickered above like nervous laughter, something in his gut shifted. Not dread. Not yet. Just that old, unwelcome feeling that something had already started, and whatever it was, it had his name written in a language only fate knew how to read. The moment Darian stepped through the front doors, he was hit by a wall of noise-barking, howling, metal doors clanging open and shut, the squeak of sneakers on linoleum, and the hum of forced smiles. The front lobby of the Ashbourne Decommission Center was doing its best impression of cheerfulness. Streamers in muted blues and yellows hung limp from ceiling tiles. A banner half unraveled read, "Retirement and New Beginnings." The scent of industrial cleaner fought with the smell of wet fur and sterilized steel. A folding table near the entrance had pamphlets. Adopt a hero. Give them a second chance. Trained to serve, born to love. A young woman in a volunteer shirt greeted Darian with a practiced smile, clipboard in hand. "Looking for a companion today, sir?" He didn't answer, just gave a polite nod and walked past. Her smile didn't even flicker. It was the kind you put on for everyone. Inside, it was worse. Rows of kennels stretched along two wings. Dogs barked frantically from behind their gates, claws scraping metal, tongues lolling. Some jumped. Others wagged their tails so hard they smacked the bars with each beat. "Over here's Ranger, he's 6, loves kids." "This one's Marley, former airport detection K9. Say hi to Bella, sweet girl great with other pets." Handlers pitched dogs like used cars, and Darian drifted through it like smoke. He wasn't here for any of them. He didn't know why he was here at all. His boots echoed differently than the parents and teenagers and volunteers, the difference between a man who belonged nowhere and people hoping to build something new. And then the barking stopped. Not completely, just in one pocket of the room, like someone had cut the sound out with a scalpel. It drew Darian's head to the far corner of the hallway, where the lights flickered dimmer and the air somehow felt colder. There, nestled at the very end, was a cage with no noise, no sign, no hopeful flyer, no volunteer standing nearby, just silence. Darian's footsteps slowed before he even realized they had. The dog inside didn't move, didn't lift its head, just lay there with its chin resting on crossed paws, as if the floor had grown out of him. The fur was dark and uneven in places, patchy around the shoulders, coarse along the ribs. His body was strong, but there was a weariness in the stillness that made it feel final, not resting, resigned. There was a laminated card clipped to the gate, V1 Sansen, not for public release. Darian stepped closer. The eyes opened just slightly. They weren't bright. They weren't begging. They were old, not in age, but in weight, like they'd seen more than one lifetime could carry, and Darian didn't know why his heart dropped, didn't know why he whispered before he even meant to. "Kyle." The name came from nowhere. It didn't belong to anyone he knew. It wasn't something he'd heard, not recently, but it slipped out of him like breath, like it had been waiting in the back of his throat for years, without ever asking permission. The dog moved, not a flinch, not a startled twitch. A turn, slow, deliberate, intentional. The dog Kale lifted his head and met Darian's eyes. And for the first time in years, Darian forgot how to breathe. The sound in the room dropped out. The volunteers, the barking, the shuffle of feet, the buzzing fluorescent lights, everything dulled behind a sudden curtain of thick silence, like the world had leaned in to witness something it didn't quite understand. Kyle didn't blink. Neither did Darian. They just looked at each other. Two beings hollowed by different kinds of war, staring through the bars like they weren't even there. Like maybe they'd met before, somewhere no map could find. "Sir?" a voice interrupted from behind. A shelter worker. Young, clipboard in hand, voice flat from repetition. "That one's not for adoption." Darian didn't turn, didn't speak. He was barely listening, because something ancient had shifted in the dog's posture. Kale had started to rise, first the shoulders, then the spine, a careful, silent motion. His legs moved like metal that hadn't been used in years, slow, uncertain, but determined. He took a single step forward. The worker frowned, lowering the clipboard slightly. He doesn't do that. He hasn't moved all week. Darian was still locked in place, something in his chest tightening like wire drawn taut. Kyle stepped forward again. Now his face was close to the bars. His head tilted, just barely, as if trying to place something unspoken in the man before him. "Kyle," Darian said again, this time softer. The dog sat, not like a trick, like recognition, not obedience. Connection. A woman across the room noticed the stillness and nudged her husband. Others began to pause their tours and glance over. The barking faded like a dying tide. "Is he responding to him?" someone whispered. The young worker spoke again, more rattled now. "Sir, please, this dog is flagged. He failed bonding, obedience, aggression control. He's on the final list." Darian finally turned his head. "I didn't ask for a list." The worker looked confused. "What?" "I didn't ask you," Darian said, eyes never leaving the dog. "He knows his name." A collective hush spread across the room. Not silence of fear, silence of reverence. As if for the first time all morning, someone had seen something they didn't know how to explain. Kyle didn't bark, didn't whine. He simply leaned forward and rested his forehead gently, slowly against the bars, closing his eyes. Darian took a step closer. So did something inside him, something that hadn't moved in years. The silence didn't last long. A voice, sharp and practiced, cut through the still air like a razor. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step away from that kennel." The handler was already moving down the corridor, clipboard in one hand, radio clipped to his shoulder. His walk had purpose, but not the good kind. The kind trained into people who'd been taught that protocol mattered more than people, more than questions, more than dogs who remembered names they weren't supposed to. Darian didn't move. Kyle didn't either. The man stopped 3 feet away, the polished plastic badge on his chest reading C. Hodges. His jaw was tight, eyes flicking between Darian and the dog as if waiting for a mistake to pounce on. "I'm serious," Hodges said, tapping his clipboard. "That one's flagged as non-adoptable. Final list. You shouldn't even be near him." Darian turned slowly. He responded to his name. Hodges snorted. "Dogs respond to tone, not names. It's coincidence. You're not the first guy who thinks he's some kind of whisperer. It doesn't change the file." He lifted the clipboard, tapped the top. V-170. Failed basic obedience 3 times. Refused multiple commands under pressure. Showed signs of unpredictability around handlers. History of aggression during recall drills. 0 resocialization success. 1 incident flagged as potentially dangerous. Darian's brow tightened. Define incident. Hodges squinted. "It means he didn't do what he was told. And when dogs like that hesitate, people get hurt." Kyle was still seated behind the bars, unmoving. His eyes hadn't left Darian, not once. There was no tension in his body, no bracing, no tail tucked between his legs. Just stillness, present, watchful, alive. "What exactly did he do?" Darian asked, voice even. Hodges looked back at the dog, unease flickering behind his eyes for the first time. "Doesn't matter. His unit discharged him as compromised. He's classified as non-rehabilitative, no adoption, no foster, no exceptions." "Then why is he even here?" Darian asked. "Why parade him in front of families if he's already been sentenced?" The handler hesitated, and in that crack of hesitation, something shifted. Darian stepped forward, not aggressive, just closer. He moved when I called his name. You saw it. Everyone did. That doesn't mean anything, Hodges snapped. It means enough to try. No, Hodges said firmly, regaining his footing. You don't get it. You think this is about giving some sad-looking dog a second chance? This isn't a shelter. These animals weren't bred for cuddles. They were built for control. You think love fixes that? Darian's gaze was steady. No, but I think recognition means something. Hodges opened his mouth to argue but stopped, because Kyle had moved again. Another step forward, not rushed, not startled, just sure. His nose touched the bars now, his eyes locked to Darian's like the rest of the world didn't exist. There was no growl, no flicker of warning, just a kind of reverence in his stillness, like he was watching something he never thought he'd see again. What's he doing? Someone whispered behind them. A small cluster of people had begun to gather, volunteers, visitors, one or two off-duty handlers who'd come to browse the more adoptable dogs. Now they were all watching this. Watching him. And it was Hodges who looked the most uncomfortable. He hasn't done that for anyone, one of the volunteers murmured. He never gets up. Hodges shook his head. It doesn't matter. That dog is dangerous. He's on the final. I want to try, Darian said, cutting him off. His tone was soft, but it held no cracks, no permission-seeking, no doubt. You can't, Hodges snapped. I'm telling you. It's not safe. Darian looked back at the cage, at the dog whose posture had changed without anyone noticing, no longer slumped, no longer a shadow in the back corner. He stood tall now, full weight distributed across steady paws, ears forward, not alert, but open. Ready. Cale looked like he was waiting for something. Not a command, a choice. I don't think he's the one you're afraid of, Darian said quietly. I think it's what happens if he proves you wrong. Hodges's jaw twitched. You're not cleared. Then clear me. It doesn't work like that. It should. A heavier silence descended, this time not reverent but charged. People weren't just watching. They were wondering. What had been done to this dog? And what did it mean that he responded not to a command, but to a name? Hodges shifted on his feet, looking over his shoulder as if expecting backup to materialize. None came. I'm filing a formal objection, he muttered. Whatever happens next, it's on you. Darian didn't blink. It already is. Kyle sat, calm and centered. The tension that had wrapped around him like barbed wire was unwinding, one breath at a time. There was no snarl, no fear. Just a kind of gravity forming between man and dog, as if fate had redrawn the lines of logic and left this, whatever this was, in its place. And somewhere in Hodges's eyes, past the procedure, past the file, there was something he didn't want to admit. He had no protocol for this. It started with a breath, not loud, not ragged, just present. Darian didn't rush it. He lowered himself slowly, knees creaking as they met the cold concrete floor. He wasn't crouching to beckon, wasn't using a command. He simply lowered himself to the dog's level in unspoken offering. I'm not above you. I'm with you. Kyle didn't move at first, but something had shifted, like the room's air had thickened around them, charged with a quiet pull. Every whisper behind Darian faded, replaced by that slow, deliberate cadence of breath. One human, one dog. And the distance between them no longer seemed so wide. The chain-link enclosure clinked as Kyle adjusted his weight. Just one paw forward. Someone behind Darian gasped. He didn't turn. Another step. Kyle's eyes, those deep, iron-shadowed eyes, never left Darian's. There was no fear in them, only a fragile kind of recognition, like a soldier remembering the battlefield in a dream he didn't choose. Then, without drama or hesitation, Cale moved again. One pace, then another, and then he pressed his head slowly, heavily, deliberately into Darian's chest. The room exhaled. No one spoke. Not even Darian. His hand, rough with years of machine oil and broken tools, lifted instinctively but hovered, trembling slightly above Cale's fur. When it landed, it was like touching something ancient, like a relic buried too long under dust and doubt. Cale didn't flinch. He leaned into it, as if this somehow was where he had been trying to return. Click. A phone camera. Then another. From the corner of his eye, Darian could see people inching closer, phones half raised, mouths parted, not in awe of him, but in disbelief at this. A girl near the back whispered, "It's like he knows him." "That's Cale," someone else murmured. "They said he was dangerous." "Shh, look at them." Even Hodges, arms still crossed like a barricade, had backed away a step. His face wasn't skeptical anymore. It was uncertain, afraid even, not of the dog, but of what this meant, of everything it disproved. Cale shifted again, his weight now fully resting against Darian, breathing slowed, body unguarded. No command had been given. No tricks, no treats, just a name and a man who didn't ask for trust but stood still long enough to be seen. Darian's hand found the back of Cale's neck, felt the raised patch of scar tissue buried beneath dense fur. Something old, something violent. The dog had lived through things no file could summarize. "You've been waiting a long time," Darian murmured. Not a statement. Not a question. Just truth, spoken aloud. Cale closed his eyes. For a second, just a second, Darian did too. In that moment, the facility disappeared. The labels, unadoptable, dangerous. Final list all dissolved like fog at sunrise. There was only breath, warm fur, the weight of something choosing not to fight, choosing to remember. When Darian finally looked up, he saw it. The ripple. The silence had spread from that cage like a wave, softening even the air around it. People weren't just recording anymore. Some had lowered their phones. A woman was crying quietly into her sleeve. A volunteer clutched her clipboard to her chest, like it had turned into something sacred. Darian whispered one word again, just to see. "Cale." The ears twitched, not startled, attuned, responding not to the voice but to the space it had come from. It was not a miracle. It was memory underground for too long, clawing its way back to light. The silence didn't last. The sound of leather shoes on concrete broke through the murmurs, sharp, purposeful, angry. Every handler straightened. Hodges cleared his throat and stepped aside, but even he looked uneasy, as if something colder than Cale had entered the room. Director Evelyn Rourke. She wasn't tall, but she didn't need to be. Her presence alone drew a line in the air. Silver streaked her tightly tied hair, but the sharp cut of her blazer and the clipped rhythm of her stride made one thing clear. This was someone who survived by rules and had no patience for those who didn't. She didn't look at Cale. She looked straight at Darian. "You need to step away from the enclosure," she said flatly. Darian didn't move. Her gaze flicked to the trembling volunteers nearby. Who gave this man access to a restricted canine? Hodges started to explain, but she raised one hand, just one, and he fell silent. Unit K947 is not on the adoption roster, she said, voice as crisp as paper-slicing skin. He is under Refusal Protocol Level 3. You were never authorized to initiate contact. Darian finally stood, slowly, calmly, the kind of calm that doesn't come from politeness, but from years of living past the edge of chaos. I didn't initiate anything, he replied. He came to me. Rourke's eyes narrowed. That animal has been deemed unstable. Failed handler repairing. Failed aggression redirection. Failed obedience in 3 states. He has a permanent termination order signed and clocked. Darian didn't blink. He has a name. She stiffened. All K9 assets are given identifiers. That does not imply... I didn't read a file. I said the name, and he came to me. Behind them, Kyle remained by the gate head, lowered, breathing steady, unmoving, as if somehow aware that this wasn't his moment to speak. It was Darian's. You're romanticizing a weapon, Rourke hissed. You don't know what he's done. No, Darian said, eyes locked on hers, but I've seen what he just did. A flicker passed over her face, barely visible, but it was there. A crack in the armor. A fracture too fast to name. She turned her attention back to Cale. He bit a handler's hand through a reinforced glove, crushed 2 fingers. Do you understand what you're stepping into? Darian stepped closer. Not aggressive, just resolute. I've bled beside men who were trained to kill and forgot how to come back. But some still did. Not because they were told to, because someone stood still long enough to be seen. The room had gone quiet again. Not the reverent kind this time, but the tension of power being challenged in its own fortress. Rourke's lips drew tight. Then she turned to the clerk at the desk behind her. Release protocol. Draft a temporary release waiver under Volunteer Provision Code 17B. The clerk blinked. Ma'am, 17B isn't... Now. She turned back to Darian and lowered her voice, not for secrecy, but for weight. You take him, she said. You take everything that comes with him. You don't come crying back when he tears apart your garage or your throat. Darian didn't flinch. He's not a unit. A beat passed. He's Kyle. Something changed in her expression then. Not approval, not acceptance, but recognition. A bitter, weary kind. Like watching someone walk straight into the storm you just crawled out of. She leaned in. Don't come back when he turns on you. Then she walked away, heels striking the concrete like a judge's gavel. Darian stood alone now, but not truly. Behind the cage, Cale had risen, his body still, but his eyes followed the man who had said his name like it mattered, like it meant something, and maybe, just maybe, it did. The rain had begun as a whisper just mist and gray. By the time Darian pulled out of the facility lot, it was falling in sheets. The kind that blurred everything, but made you look harder anyway. Wipers sliced across the windshield in rhythm. His old truck half-rust, half-memory groaned against the wet. The heater wheezed low, working hard, but never quite enough. Beside him, in the passenger seat, sat Cale, or rather, curled. No muzzle, no leash now. Just a navy blue blanket Darian had grabbed from the back seat, now tucked beneath Cale's chest. The German shepherd hadn't hesitated. Not once. The moment Darian opened the passenger door, he jumped in, turned once, and lay down like it had always been his spot. Not a sound, not a tremble, just rest. Darian's hands gripped the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. The road ahead was mostly empty, just fog, headlights, and the occasional sway of pine trees lining the shoulders. But his focus kept drifting sideways, to the shadow coiled on the seat next to him. Kyle's breathing was slow, eyes half-lidded, but every so often they flicked open, checking, not fearful, not anxious, just tracking. Still a soldier, Darian thought. But there was something else, something quieter, something that made Darian's throat tighten against his will. This dog had chosen him. He hadn't earned it. Hadn't done anything but say a name he didn't even know he knew. Kyle. That word, it still echoed in the hollow places of Darian's chest, like it had always been there, tucked beneath old wounds and sealed doors. A name without memory, but with weight. He glanced again. Kyle was watching him now, not directly, just barely, the way someone does when they don't want to be caught looking. The scar along Kyle's left ear was clearer now in the dim cab light, faded but jagged. There were more marks, thin lines along his flank, one near the rib cage that looked like a puncture. Old violence, faded pain. Darian knew the map of scars too well, wore his own beneath the skin. Outside, thunder rumbled somewhere behind the clouds. Kyle didn't flinch, didn't move, just blinked, slow. "You don't spook easy, huh?" Darian muttered. His voice cracked a bit, not from strain, but from not using it for things that mattered. Kyle didn't answer. Of course he didn't. But his tail tapped once, almost imperceptibly, against the seat. It was enough. Darian exhaled, a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the moment the facility gate clanged shut behind them. Since the woman in the blazer warned him with eyes too tired to lie. He hadn't brought home a rescue dog. He'd brought home a reckoning. A part of him had expected tension, resistance, maybe even rage. But instead there was only this quiet presence beside him. No snarls, no growls, no defiance, just a creature curled into the passenger seat like he'd been waiting there all along. The rain picked up again, angrier now, clashing against the roof in erratic beats. But inside the truck there was only stillness. Darian loosened his grip on the wheel. "I don't know what this is," he thought. "But it's the first thing that's felt real in years." He reached out, slow, careful like you would toward a bomb that hadn't gone off. His hand hovered inches from Kyle's head. The shepherd didn't move. Darian's fingers touched fur, coarse, damp, but warm. Kyle let out a sigh. Not a growl, not a warning, just release. Darian leaned back, hand resting near the gear shift now, fingers still tingling from that brief contact. "You're not a mission," he thought. "You're a mirror." Up ahead, the outline of his workshop came into view, dim porch light flickering like it wasn't sure it should stay on. He eased into the gravel driveway, shifted to park. Neither of them moved. Rain ticked against the windshield. The world outside blurred into streaks of silver and shadow. But inside the truck, something unspoken had begun. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something. And for two broken souls who'd forgotten how to start over, that was more than enough. The garage groaned as the storm crawled in. It wasn't the kind of place you'd call home, not even on your loneliest day. Fluorescent lights buzzed with a dying hum, flickering as if trying to forget they were still alive. Grease-stained rags lay in folded surrender on a cracked metal workbench. A transmission casing, half disassembled, lay next to a mug of stale coffee that had grown its own ecosystem. Everything smelled like rust, gasoline, and yesterday. Darian pushed the door open with his shoulder, umbrella long abandoned, rainwater still clinging to his jacket in reluctant beads. Kyle followed wordlessly, paws silent on the concrete, body low but unafraid, more reconnaissance than caution. "This is it," Darian muttered. He wasn't sure if he was talking to the dog or himself. "Welcome to the palace." The shepherd padded in a slow arc, eyes scanning, not sniffing like a dog, surveying like someone who used to clear rooms and remember every exit. Darian tossed the keys into a tray by the bench and shrugged off his jacket. Water hit the floor in rhythmic drops. He didn't bother to wipe it. Kyle made no sound. He moved toward the double garage doors and curled into position, just beside the hinges, facing outward, like it was the most natural place in the world. Not on the makeshift bedroll Darian had set out earlier, not near the warmth of the space heater, but there, like a statue carved in vigilance. Darian watched, arms crossed. "You always sleep facing the way out?" Kyle didn't respond. Of course he didn't, but his ears flicked, just once, as if acknowledging the question and ignoring it. Thunder murmured somewhere off in the distance, the kind that rolls low like a warning. Darian exhaled and turned to his workbench. He wasn't ready for sleep, and hadn't really been for years. Not the real kind, the one that heals. He pulled out an old carburetor from a shelf, set it on the table like it was a patient, and began wiping away the grime. The work gave his hands purpose, gave his mind something to anchor to. Behind him, Kyle hadn't moved. Midnight came quiet. The storm didn't. Rain tapped on the tin roof like impatient fingers. Wind howled beneath the siding. One of the overhead bulbs finally gave up and blinked out with a sigh. Darian had drifted off in the recliner near the breaker box, head tilted back, jaw slack. A click woke him. Not loud, just deliberate. Kyle. He wasn't lying down anymore. He was standing tense, ears sharp, body angled, pacing, one step, then another, then back again. A tight corridor of motion near the edge of the garage doors. His paws made no noise, but something about it cracked the quiet. Darian sat up slowly, rubbed his face. "Kyle." The dog stopped, not at the sound of his name, but because something else had snapped into his field of focus. He stood still now, utterly still, facing a wall. No growl, no bark, just presence, as if the wall itself had done something wrong. Darian followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just shelves of parts, rusted tools, and a crooked poster of a '69 Charger. But Kyle saw something. Or remembered it. His breathing changed. Not panicked, but deeper. Measured. Almost counting. Then, without warning, he stepped forward 2 feet, then froze again. His posture had shifted. He wasn't a dog in a garage anymore. He was a soldier, watching, listening, waiting for a breach that might not come, but had come before. Darian stood. The air felt colder. He didn't approach Kyle, just stood nearby, hands low, voice level. "It's not there anymore." Kyle didn't turn, didn't blink. Only after a long, haunted pause did he shift. Not relaxed, but released. He padded back to the doors, sat down, not curled, not settled, just waiting, as if to say, "I'll sleep after the perimeter holds." Darian swallowed hard. Something inside him ached, but not with pity. with recognition. Kyle had been trained for war. But he had also lived one, and some wars. They echo long after the fighting ends. The storm had died some time before dawn, but the silence it left behind was thicker than any thunder. Darian woke not from rest, but from alertness, the kind that feels like a needle pressed into the back of your neck, pulling your consciousness out before your mind is ready. His eyes opened to gray light slanting through the garage windows, the kind of cold light that makes you realize you forgot to breathe all night. Kyle was still near the garage doors, but he was shaking, not trembling from cold, not the erratic twitch of a bad dream, but something deeper, something locked beneath the muscle, controlled, suppressed, like a motor trying not to stall under too much load. Darian didn't move at first, just watched. Kyle's eyes were open, distant, unfocused. A statue, cracking. Slowly Darian rose. No sudden movements. No words yet. Just the quiet rhythm of boots on concrete. "Hey." His voice was low, edged with concern. "You okay, buddy?" Kyle didn't flinch, but his body quivered again, just once, enough to make Darian stop halfway between them. There was a wrongness in the air, not fear, not pain, residual, like the echo of something that didn't belong in this world but had passed through anyway. Darian crouched slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm going to check your collar, all right? Just want to make sure you're not hiding a broken chip or something." Kyle didn't resist. Didn't lean in either. He stayed still, as if granting permission in silence. Darian reached around Kyle's thick neck gently, fingers brushing matted fur and the cracked leather of the collar. His touch paused when he felt a bump small, metallic wedged beneath the inner lining. It wasn't the standard ID tag shelters used, and it wasn't a GPS chip either. It was hidden. Darian's brows pulled together. He unclasped the collar and turned it in his hand. Carefully, he peeled back a stitched flap of leather. It had been sealed with something like military-grade adhesive. Inside, secured between layers of hide and reinforced nylon, was a small, perfectly round piece of dull steel. No name, no number. Just a single engraved symbol, a compass. But not any compass. The 4 cardinal points were warped, bent inward like blades. At the center was a tiny, almost imperceptible dot etched so deep it looked burned. Around the rim, a set of marks that didn't look like any language Darian recognized, angular, precise, deliberate. His fingers tightened on the tag. Something about it clawed at a memory, one he didn't want to find. Darian looked at Kyle. "You've been places, haven't you?" he whispered. "Not just kennels, not just cages." Kyle met his gaze, and in that moment there was nothing dog-like in those eyes. There was knowledge and grief, a silent ledger of things seen, endured, and buried. "You're not just a rescue dog, are you?" Darian said, barely audible now. "They didn't just lose you. They released you." He stood slowly, the tag still pressed into his palm like a coin from the river Styx. This wasn't military issue, at least not any branch he'd ever served under, and Darian had served everywhere. Whatever program Kale came from, it wasn't supposed to be found. He looked down again. Kale hadn't moved, but there was something in his stillness now, a quiet question hanging in the space between them, as if Kale were waiting, to be believed, to be seen. Darian turned the collar over again, thumb brushing across the cracked leather. There were burn marks near the edges. Small, almost surgical, like someone had once tried to cut the tag out and failed. Back at the workbench, Darian lit the old halogen lamp. The bulb buzzed into life, casting sharp gold onto his hands as he set the tag down and leaned in. He wasn't a tech guy, never was, but he knew encryption marks when he saw them. He'd seen something like this once in Kandahar, a dossier passed hand to hand, never logged, that spoke of neural integrated scent response canine units, something about emotion recognition overlays. It had been classified, then buried, and now it was wearing a collar in his garage. KL finally moved just a step and sat beside the bench. He didn't look at the tag. He didn't need to. Darian stared down at the metal. He thought of all the soldiers he'd known who didn't come back the same. Now he realized some never came back at all. They came back dismantled, repackaged, rehomed. KL had once been something else, something built to be forgotten. Outside, a car passed on the wet street, its headlights sweeping across the garage window like a silent spotlight. Inside, Kyle exhaled through his nose, low and steady, and rested his head against Darian's boot. The tag glinted under the lamp, a relic of something unspeakable. And suddenly, the question shifted. Not what was Kyle, but who made him that way? The wind on the highway pulled at the truck like it wanted to keep them from reaching her. Darian drove through the edge of town, past forgotten warehouses and buildings with paint peeled off like old regret. Kyle lay curled in the passenger seat, his ears occasionally twitching but his body calm. Not relaxed, never truly relaxed, but trusting. Enough. The tag was in Darian's pocket, its weight absurd for something the size of a coin. He hadn't looked at it again. Didn't need to. The symbol had already burned itself into the back of his eyes. He pulled into the gravel lot behind a weathered two-story brick building. The sign out front, Dr. Clara Wynne, DVM, Canine Tactical and Trauma, was sun-bleached, one corner broken. But the brass plaque below it gleamed, polished daily. It read, "We treat the dogs they don't send home." Clara Wynne didn't open the door so much as she swung it with authority. She was in her late 50s, short hair silvered at the edges, eyes sharp as a sniper's. A faded Army Medical Corps patch was sewn onto her lab coat beneath it, a darker insignia, unofficial and unfinished. Darian knew better than to ask. She didn't waste breath on pleasantries. "Jesus, Holt, when you said it was urgent, I didn't think you meant ghost protocol urgent." She squinted at the passenger seat. "That's the dog?" Cale lifted his head. He didn't growl, didn't wag his tail either, just stared back at her like he was sizing up the battlefield. "He's got a tag," Darian said, stepping out. "Not one I've ever seen before." Clara motioned him inside without a word. The exam room smelled like antiseptic and sage, a strange combination that somehow worked sterile but sacred. A small table held a weathered Bible, a half-burned candle, and a photo of a German shepherd with a scar that ran like a lightning bolt across its eye. Darian recognized the dog. Kilo, Unit 9, MIA, presumed destroyed in the IED compound collapse back in '09. Clara had never taken that photo down. Kael followed Darian into the room, padding softly. His movements were precise, fluid, like a machine pretending to be tired. Clara circled him once, then twice, her fingers moving just above Kael's body, not touching yet, just reading, interpreting muscle, stance, the way he carried history and the way he breathed. Finally, she knelt beside him. "Permission to touch?" she asked. Kyle didn't move. She pressed her hand gently to his shoulder. "Right then." Within minutes, she had him on the table, calm under her touch. Her fingers moved with care, parting fur, scanning for tension lines, heat shifts. Then she found it, a seam along Kyle's left flank, no bigger than a hairline fracture. She pressed gently. Kale stiffened but didn't resist. Clara leaned in. "That's not from any civilian surgery. Sutures were subdermal, precision stitching, microburn sealing. Someone went in with intent not to leave a trace." Darian's voice was low. "And did they?" She gave him a look. "No, not from me." She opened a drawer and pulled out a biometric chip reader, military grade, not consumer junk. "This'll tell us if there's anything still broadcasting," she muttered. She powered it on, then pressed the scanner to Kale's shoulder. The screen blinked green, then red, then green again. A warning tone screeched. Then the scanner shut down entirely. The screen flashed once. "Unauthorized encryption. Protocol locked." A faint wisp of smoke rose from the reader. Clara stared at it, blinking. "Well," she said flatly, "that's a first." She unplugged it and tossed it into the trash. "That chip's not just encrypted. It's booby-trapped. Whoever implanted that didn't want anyone sniffing around." Darian ran a hand through his hair. "So, not just military?" Clara exhaled slowly, then stepped back. She looked at Kale like one might look at a soldier with too many medals and too few answers. "This isn't your average K-9 project, Darian. This is black budget, ghost funding, possibly unauthorized even by the people authorizing it." She leaned forward again and brushed a hand gently under Kyle's chin. "You poor bastard," she whispered. She gestured to the collar on the counter. "That the tag?" Darian nodded and slid it to her. Clara picked it up with tweezers. Her expression changed the second she saw the symbol. "That's not military," she muttered. "That's contractor, maybe even independent." She traced the compass edges with a magnifier. "Looks like the company's stamp they used for bio-integrated testing. Early days of emotional mapping tech." "Emotional mapping?" Darian asked. "They were trying to link scent with trauma, teach dogs to predict a human's breakdown before it happened. Think PTSD detection on a molecular level." Darian blinked. "That ever work?" Clara looked at Kyle, then back at him. "You tell me." They stood there in silence, the room thick with the realization that this dog wasn't a stray. He wasn't forgotten. He was buried. Kyle laid his head on the exam table, eyes watching the door. Still, listening, Darian reached out and placed a hand on his back. Whatever Kale had been made into, whatever program had carved him open, stitched him back and left him behind. He was here now, and someone out there didn't want that. Clara finally broke the silence. "You need to be careful, Holt. If someone sees that tag, they'll want him back." Darian nodded. "They'll have to come through me." Clara's office had gone still. Not the kind of stillness that came from quiet, but the kind that followed revelation. The kind that made the air feel too heavy to breathe. Kyle lay at Darian's feet, unmoving now, as if something in the earlier scan had drained the last of his defenses. His eyes, however, never left the door. Clara stood by the scanner's remains, arms crossed, mouth tight. She hadn't spoken in over a minute. Not since the chip shorted out. Not since the screen blinked red and died with that single warning. Unauthorized encryption. Protocol locked. "Clara," Darian said, voice low. "What kind of animal carries a chip that can kill the scanner?" She turned slowly, resting her knuckles on the table like someone preparing to deliver a verdict. "This chip," she began, "is military grade, yes, but not standard issue. It's not registered with any open database. Not even the off-book K9 assignments we used to get from JSOC." Darian raised an eyebrow. "Which means?" She walked to her cabinet, pulled a binder with frayed edges, and dropped it hard on the table. It puffed up dust and memories. "These," she said, flipping pages, "are the implants we used in active theater's standard GPS trackers, biomonitoring ID, trauma markers. Every dog that served got one. Even the ones in black site work had some form of tag, something traceable." She found a page, stabbed it with her finger. This isn't on any of them." Darian glanced at the schematics. The chip Cale carried wasn't even in the known blueprint index. The signal protocol it used hadn't been listed, and the symbol etched into the tag half compass, half eclipse, might as well have been alien. Clara's voice dropped a notch. "This dog wasn't meant to be adopted, Darian." He looked down at Cale, who shifted subtly, barely but enough to press his flank gently against Darian's boot. Not for warmth, for confirmation. As if trying to ask, "You're still here?" "I found him listed as inactive aggression risk," Darian muttered. "Red collar status? No history, no owner, no unit name. Just KAEL, like it was scrubbed." Clara nodded slowly. "Because it was. You're not looking at a discarded service animal. You're looking at an erased one." Darian didn't answer. "You don't get this level of encryption without a reason," Clara continued. "This chip isn't for ID. It's not even for monitoring. It's like a lockbox, one that fights back if you try to open it." She turned the scanner toward him. "And what kind of dog needs that?" Silence crept between the hum of the old refrigerator and the ticking of Clara's watch. Darian folded his arms, leaned back against the wall. "Tell me what you're not saying." Clara met his gaze, and in her eyes something shifted, not fear, but the shadow of something close. "You ever hear of Project Cerberus?" she asked. Darian stilled. "Rumors. Afghanistan. Dogs trained not just to detect, but to respond without handlers. Preemptive strike logic." Clara gave a dry laugh. "You think that's where it ended?" He didn't answer. "They moved beyond detection," she said. "Started to link dogs with biofeedback networks, trauma mirroring. The theory was, if you could condition a dog to respond to fear patterns before a soldier broke, maybe you could stop the breakdown, preempt PTSD, maybe even prevent a suicide." Darian stared. "You mean dogs as emotional override?" "Or fail-safes," she said darkly. "Whatever Cale was trained for, it wasn't rescue." She stepped closer, her voice now just above a whisper. "This dog wasn't meant to survive, and he damn sure wasn't meant to be found." Darian's jaw tensed. "Then why was he in that shelter?" Clara shook her head. "I've seen it before. The quiet way the system disappears them. Dump them in civilian pounds under fake names. Mark them unadoptable. Wait out the expiration date." Her voice caught. "Just a little. Enough." "Sometimes," she added, "they're just waiting for no one to care." Darian knelt beside Cale. The dog didn't flinch. Didn't lean in either. He just stayed there, a breathing relic, half war machine, half ghost. Darian pressed a hand gently to the back of Kyl's neck, just above the collar line. "You knew," he whispered. "Didn't you?" Kyl's ear twitched. Clara exhaled, exhausted. "You don't get it, Holt. Dogs like him, they're programmed to obey pain, to survive isolation, to bury trauma like a file. If he's still functional, it's not because they failed. It's because he did what he was trained to do and survived despite it." Darian stood up, slower now, more aware. "You're saying he's dangerous." "I'm saying," she replied, "he's classified." She turned off the light on the exam table. Shadows fell across Kyl's body. He didn't move, but his eyes didn't close either. "You should walk away," Clara said gently, "before someone realizes he's still out here." Darian looked down at the dog one more time. "No." Clara tilted her head. "You sure about that?" He didn't blink. "He's not a threat. He's not a system. He's not a project." Darian reached for the collar. "He's Kyle." Clara didn't argue. But as Darian opened the door and Kyle rose to follow, she called out softly, almost an afterthought. "Then be ready." He paused. "For what?" Her eyes never left Kyle's silhouette. "For what they trained him to do when someone finally came back for him." The rain had stopped, but the night still felt wet, like it hadn't decided whether to let go or hold its breath. Darian stood at the edge of his cluttered garage, one hand wrapped around a chipped mug of reheated coffee, the other resting on the frame of the open door. Kyle lay nearby, not asleep, but still, always still, unless motion became necessary. The neighborhood was quiet, half forgotten. Rows of houses worn from years of neglect. Garages like his tucked in alleys that never saw streetlights. A place where people didn't ask questions, where someone could disappear, which made what he saw all the more wrong. A black SUV, windows dark, engine low and smooth. It rolled down the back alley like it wasn't in a hurry, but not slow enough to be casual either. Darian narrowed his eyes. No markings, no license plate on the front. Tires whispering against damp concrete. It passed the open mouth of his garage, didn't pause, didn't even tilt toward them, but he felt it. That subtle shift, the weight of a gaze without a face. He took a step forward. Kyle didn't move. The SUV vanished around the corner. No brake lights, no turn signal, just gone. Darian waited a beat, then another. That's when Kyle moved, not when the SUV appeared, but after it was already gone. Kyle's ears twitched first, then his whole body shifted upright in a single, fluid motion. Head low, shoulders squared, muscles coiled like a bow that had been pulled tight and held there. Too long. And then he growled. Not a warning, a statement. Deep, controlled. The kind of sound that comes not from surprise, but recognition. Darian put down his mug. You saw it too. Kyle stepped toward the alley, not fast, not frantic, just precise, calculated. Like something inside him had woken up and was now scanning threat vectors. His body stilled near the edge of the doorway, eyes fixed on where the SUV had turned. The growl faded, but the tension didn't. Darian crouched beside him. That wasn't just some lost tourist, was it? Kyle didn't respond. Didn't need to. Darian stood, wiping rain from his brow with the back of his sleeve. His fingers itched residue from an instinct that hadn't fully died even after his discharge. He stepped out onto the alley's cracked concrete. The tire tracks were already fading in the damp. No oil spots, no noise. Nothing left behind but a feeling that something had just measured them and moved on. Inside the garage, Kyle paced once, then sat by the toolbox facing the wall. His breathing returned to normal. His eyes did not. Darian closed the garage door halfway, just enough to obscure them from the street, not enough to feel trapped. He looked at Kyle again. "You didn't growl when it was near, you waited." Kyle blinked once, almost slow. "You recognized it." Something cold slid into Darian's gut. Not fear, readiness. It had been a long time since he felt that shift-like gravity had changed directions around him. But now, standing beside a dog with secrets buried deeper than scars, he could feel it again. Someone was looking. And they weren't just curious. Darian went back inside, pulled the old duffel from under the workbench, unzipped it. M9 sidearm, oilcloth still damp, 2 loaded mags, expired but reliable. And at the bottom, his old encrypted flash drive. He hadn't touched it in years, didn't even know why he packed it when he moved into this shell of a home. But now it felt like the past was curling around his ankles again, pulling him into something he never finished walking away from. He sat on the garage step beside Kyle. "Whoever they are, they weren't expecting to find you alive." Kyle turned his head, just slightly. That same stillness in his eyes, the same restraint that felt less like calm and more like control. "Someone built you," Darian said quietly, "then tried to erase you." Kyle didn't look away. "And now they want their ghost back." Outside, the sound of a distant engine echoed faintly, but didn't return. Still, Darian didn't sleep that night. Neither did Kyle. The morning fog hadn't lifted. It clung to the ground like breath held too long, curling around fence posts and creeping beneath the garage door. The kind of cold that settled in joints, in bone. Darian stepped out into it, coffee in one hand, tension in the other. He wasn't sure what woke him. Not a sound, not a nightmare, just that gnawing wrongness, like the air had shifted a few degrees off normal. Kyle hadn't barked, but Darian found him standing when he came down the stairs, ears alert, eyes locked on the door, completely still. The kind of stillness that knew. Behind the garage, the ground stayed damp long after the rain. That's what made them stand out. Footprints. Too deep to be his, too large to be from the neighborhood kids. Boots, not sneakers. Military tread, half masked by the gravel but not hidden from someone who'd once made his living tracking the subtle. They circled the shed once, paused near the boarded window, and vanished back toward the alley. No break-in, no forced entry, just observation, just a warning. He checked the exterior cameras. The one facing the back shed had been rotated. A few degrees. Just enough to miss that approach angle. Darian crouched beneath it. The bracket hadn't been broken. It had been adjusted. The kind of shift that took intention, not clumsiness. He rewound the feed. Static for an hour between 2:12 and 3:14 a.m. No storm last night, no power loss, only silence. Back inside, Kyle stood in the exact same place Darian had left him. facing the door, breathing steady, eyes sharp. "You haven't slept," Darian said softly. Kyle didn't flinch, just blinked, once. "You knew someone was here." Another blink, no wag, no tail twitch. Just that soldier's stillness again. Like his entire body had been built for a battlefield that hadn't quite ended. Darian exhaled, rubbed his temples. His heartbeat was steady but lower, like it was preparing for something he couldn't yet name. This wasn't just anxiety. This was recognition. The pattern was all too familiar. Footsteps that never knocked. Cameras that told half-truths. Silence that arrived before the threat did. Someone was circling. Not to intimidate, but to confirm. He took a slow lap through the house. Doors locked, windows secured. Nothing felt broken, only watched. Later that day he set a decoy motion sensor near the trash bins, an old trick from his recon days, not to alert, just to mark movement. At dusk it triggered. Not from a raccoon, not from wind. From someone who stepped too lightly, for someone who belonged. Back in the garage, Cale shifted positions. Not randomly, not restlessly, but tactically, always keeping line of sight to the door, always with his back against a wall. A dog doesn't learn that from instinct. He learns it from war. Darian sat down near him, slow and deliberate. "You're watching the way I used to." Kyle didn't move. He added quieter, "And that scares the hell out of me." The silence between them wasn't empty. It was shared. Not the kind that needed answers, but the kind that told you you were no longer imagining it. Someone was coming. And Kyle wasn't going to sleep until they did. The road to Edric March's house was long, winding, and deliberately unlisted. Tucked behind a thicket of skeletal trees and rusted fencing, the place looked like the kind of property that didn't want company, and made you feel it. Darian parked just outside the gate. Cale sat in the back seat, silent, watching the surroundings like he understood something was off even before the engine died. "Stay," Darian murmured, though he doubted it was necessary. Kyle didn't move. The gate was locked with a digital keypad, a relic Edric had installed back when paranoia was still called security. Darian keyed in the 6-digit code from memory. It buzzed, the lock clicked, and the past creaked open with it. Edric's house wasn't really a house. It was more bunker than home concrete bones beneath layers of forgotten paranoia. The windows were boarded from the inside. The front porch light hadn't worked in 5 years. The door opened before Darian knocked. "You're late by 4 years," Edric said flatly, voice like rusted wire. Darian managed a half smile. "You still owe me one." Edric looked him over once. "I owe you half a liver and a way out of Kandahar. Didn't think that included house calls." Darian held up a small plastic bag inside it, the strange compass-shaped tag he'd pulled from Kyle's collar. No words, just that broken symbol. Edric's face changed, not fear, worse, recognition. Inside, the lights were dim, the air thick with dust and solder fumes. Blueprints littered the tables. Radio parts, military-grade signal blockers. The kind of setup you built when you wanted to vanish but still hear everything. Darian followed him into the workshop. "You ever seen that symbol before?" he asked. Edric didn't answer right away. He put on a pair of glasses, lens cracked, held together by electrical tape, and pulled the tag beneath a mounted inspection lamp. He didn't touch it, just looked, then exhaled through his nose. "Where'd you find this?" His voice had dropped, lower. Not dramatic, just careful. Darian didn't flinch. "Off a dog they said was unadoptable. German Shepherd. Scars. Silent. Knew how to patrol without being taught. And you took him? Yeah. Edric laughed once. Dry, bitter. Christ, Darian. What is it? Edric finally reached for a drawer, pulled out a faded folder, the kind that used to hold classified memos before everything went digital, slid it across the table. The file was unmarked except for one word stamped in red ink. Spectre. He opened it. Inside, photos, half-burned documents, redacted names. A series of canines, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois muzzled, restrained, eyes reflecting something other than just obedience. Numbers tattooed inside ears, scars too symmetrical to be accidental, and the symbol same as the tag. Compass rose, split through the center. Project Spectre K9. What was it? Darian asked. Edric's eyes stayed on the folder, like looking up might trigger something that couldn't be put back. Not military, not officially. It was run around the branches contracted through what we called ghost budgets, off-book, off-grid, off everything. You don't find it by looking. You find it when something's already gone wrong. Darian felt Cale's weight behind that silence. The way the dog wouldn't sleep, the scars, the way he'd chosen to trust like he remembered him. What did they do? Edric hesitated. Then, they tried to strip instinct from training, combine gene-line targeting, surgical conditioning, neural triggers, make a unit that wouldn't question, wouldn't need food, wouldn't flinch. And Cale? If he has that tag, he was one of them. But the program's gone. Publicly, never existed. Internally, Edric leaned closer. They shut it down after 6 dogs disappeared during a failed reconditioning. No trace. 6 canines just gone. They say they were terminated. But you don't believe that. I think someone let them go. Darian stared at the photo of one dog ears pinned, eyes cloudy, mouth open in what looked less like a bark and more like a scream. And if someone finds out Cale is alive? Edric didn't blink. They'll try to finish what they started. Outside, Cale hadn't moved. But when Darian walked back out, he was facing the road, head up, still, watching. The rain started again. Thin, steady sheets that blurred the windows of Edric's bunker like breath on glass. Darian sat opposite him at the workbench, Kyle at his feet, still as a shadow. Yet Darian could feel the quiet tension in the dog's frame, a coiled alertness that never fully went away. Edric lit a cigarette with hands that had built bombs and bypassed biometric locks. Now, they trembled slightly. Whether from age or memory, Darian couldn't tell. You remember the early days of drone warfare? Edric began. Everyone thought the tech was the threat, the machines, but it wasn't. It was the people behind the consoles, what they were allowed to do once they didn't have to see the blood. He tapped the ash into a rusted tin. Spectre wasn't about replacing humans. It was about removing the part that made them hesitate. Darian didn't speak, just waited. And Edric eventually kept going. They started with behavioral enhancement, positive response loops. Then came suppression of fear response, stim pack trials, cortical dampening implants, stuff not even DARPA would touch, but they pushed it. Because dogs were legal gray, not soldiers, not citizens, no rights. He picked up the metal tag again, held it like it might bite him. There were whispers, quiet ones. Terms passed between texts like ghost stories. Obedience thresholds. Disobedience equals deletion. You failed a command 3 times in a row. Edric met Darian's eyes. You didn't get retrained. You got deleted. Darian exhaled, a slow breath through his nose. The rain was louder now, like the sky was trying to drown the truth. "And no one stopped it?" he asked. Edric let out a soft, humorless laugh. "Who was left to stop them? It was run by contractors, inside shell programs, inside shell corporations. Everything was black-budgeted, untraceable. Even the watchdogs were blind." He gestured toward Kael, still watching the door, every breath controlled. "I saw files. Dogs with spine implants, ocular calibrators, forced imprinting where their loyalty wasn't earned, it was installed. Like software. One wrong tone of voice, one deviation from pattern, and the kill switch fired. That's not training, Darian." Darian looked down at Kael. Kael, who hadn't moved from that spot since they arrived, who hadn't needed a single command to position himself between Darian and the door, who flinched at nothing except thunder, except silence. He spoke softly, as if to himself. This wasn't training. This was programming. Edric nodded once, grave. They weren't building companions. They were manufacturing ghosts, weapons with fur. A pause, heavy. They called them the Ghost Unit, unofficially, because once they were deployed, they didn't come back the same, if they came back at all. Darian's throat felt dry. Kael was one of them, or the last of them. Outside, a low growl broke the stillness. Kael. Head lifted, eyes narrowed at the window. A car had slowed outside. No headlights, no sound, just presence. Then it passed. Kael relaxed. Barely. Darian didn't. He stood slowly. "What happens," he asked, "if they realize one of their ghosts is still breathing?" Edric didn't answer immediately, just looked at the tag in his palm, then to the dog at the door, then back to Darian. "You bury him deeper," he said, "or you teach him how to fight like he never forgot." The streetlight outside flickered as Darian pulled up. His eyes narrowed the moment he saw it. The garage door wasn't closed. Not fully. Just a few inches shy of the ground, barely perceptible to someone passing by, but enough to scream wrong to someone who'd closed it himself 6 hours ago. His hand hovered near the glove box where the old pistol sat, never used, barely legal. But he didn't reach for it. Not yet. Kael shifted in the passenger seat, alert, alive. No growl, not yet, just the rising stiffness in his shoulders, the silent poise of something ancient remembering how to become a weapon. Darian opened the door with a slow creak. The night air was damp. A thunderhead loomed far off, but the wind had shifted colder now. He let Kael out first. The dog moved like vapor, low and precise, scanning every shadow. Darian followed. The garage door groaned as he lifted it inch by inch. The sound rasped against his nerves. Nothing inside moved. But it was wrong. Too still, like something was holding its breath. Kael stepped in first, nose twitching. Darian's boots echoed softly on the concrete floor. The overhead bulb buzzed above dim, half dead, but enough to cast shadows off the old tools, the crates, the workbench at the back. Kael froze. Low growl, one breath long, then he advanced. The shadow near the workbench stirred. "Don't!" Darian barked instinctively, his voice slicing the silence like a blade. Kael stopped mid-pounce, muscles quivering, teeth just shy of bare. From behind a stack of crates, a figure rose slowly, hands first, then face, pale, unshaven, gaunt. Darian didn't lower his stance, didn't blink. "I know that dog," the man said softly. I built the ports in his skull." Darien frowned. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped into the light. A faded badge hung from his neck, cracked plastic, name half rubbed off. But Darien read enough. Isaac Reeve, Facility Tech. Clearance classified. "You broke into my home," Darien said. Isaac looked him in the eye. "I didn't come to hurt you. I came because someone else will. And when they do, they won't knock." Kyle hadn't moved. He stood between the two men like a bridge and a line in the sand. "Talk," Darien said. "Now." Isaac exhaled, hands still visible. "I was there. Facility 9, Project Spectre. I wasn't military, just a tech, a systems guy. But I saw the interface maps, the suppression protocols. I watched them erase instincts from those dogs, replace them with hard-coded response matrices. You know what they called failure?" Darien didn't answer. Isaac did. Compromise. A single moment of hesitation meant deletion. But there was one unit, different, one they couldn't control fully, adaptive, resilient, wouldn't break. His eyes dropped to Kale. "They called him K0L. Your Kale." Darien said nothing. His pulse ticked behind his eyes. They tried everything: neurological dampeners, hormone loop disruptors. Still wouldn't obey beyond a certain point. He started anticipating patterns, countering handlers. He didn't forget commands. He ignored them. Isaac stepped closer, then stopped when Kyle bristled. They were going to terminate him. But the lab fire happened first. Someone got him out. Rewrote his registry, falsified euthanasia records. But he wasn't just abandoned. He was erased. Silence. Rain began to whisper against the roof again, soft and steady. Darien folded his arms. "Why come here? Why now?" "Because they're scrubbing house," Isaac said. "Anyone connected. Whistleblowers, technicians, even dogs that escaped. They're tracking anomalies in animal shelter systems. They'll find him. And you." He reached slowly into his jacket, pulled out a folded piece of paper, and slid it across the bench. Coordinates. A name. Dr. Adrienne Rourke. A line underneath, handwritten. She didn't want it to become this. Darien stared at it. "You helped build this," he said, voice low. Isaac nodded once. "And I'll pay for it. But maybe not today. Maybe not by letting them put this dog back on the table." He backed away toward the door. Kyle didn't growl, just followed him with unblinking eyes. Isaac paused before stepping into the night. "Watch for the tags," he warned. "They won't come in suits. They won't wear badges. But they'll know your name before you hear theirs." Then he was gone, swallowed by rain and silence. Darien stood there for a long moment, heart slow but burning. Kale finally moved, quietly returning to the center of the room, then settling, just inches from the coordinates on the bench. Like a sentinel, like a decision had already been made. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Darien found the flash drive, wrapped in waxed paper, wedged beneath the wrench drawer. Exactly where Isaac said it would be if he didn't come back. He hadn't come back. Kyle sat in the corner of the garage, his eyes fixed on the door like the night itself might come knocking. He hadn't moved since Isaac left. Hadn't eaten either. Darien stared at the drive in his palm, unlabeled, cold. Just a sliver of black plastic and secrets. But it felt heavier than any weapon he'd ever held. He slid it into the port of his old laptop, the one with no internet, no cloud, no tracking, just dust and dying pixels. The screen flickered, then loaded a folder labeled Only. Colo 1, Observed Deviations. He hesitated, then clicked. The first video loaded grainy and gray surveillance footage time-stamped nearly 3 years ago. The angle was high, maybe a ceiling cam, the room sterile, white tile, mirrors, a concrete slab at the center. And Kyle, younger, maybe though it was hard to tell, with dogs, same posture, same alert eyes, but there was something tighter in his frame, a tension that hadn't yet broken. 3 men in full tactical gear entered the frame. One carried a padded training sleeve, another held what looked like a shock baton. The third, a man with sharp features and the dead eyes of someone who never lost sleep, spoke a word Darian couldn't hear. Kyle didn't move. The man repeated it. Still nothing. Then came the order. Engage civilian target. Authorization code. Black fog. A fourth figure stepped into the room. Female. Civilian clothes. No protection. Darian's gut clenched. His hand hovered over the spacebar, but he couldn't look away. Kyle's ears flicked, his head tilted. He didn't move. The handler gave a sharp nod. The man with the baton stepped forward and struck Kale across the ribs. Kale's body absorbed it, but his eyes stayed locked on the woman. Another strike. Still no movement. The footage jumped, different camera now. Outdoor training ground, simulated town, smoke bombs, gunfire, maybe blanks, maybe not. Kyle was outfitted in black combat gear, muzzle off. The same voice barked orders off-screen. Sweep and neutralize. Prioritize non-uniformed assets. No hesitation. The camera zoomed in as Kyle breached a doorway. Inside, 2 actors posing as unarmed teenagers. Kyle stopped. He barked short, sharp, then backed up. Refused. The footage glitched. A red overlay blinked in the corner. Non-compliant behavior detected. Next clip. Same room. Kyle chained, muzzle locked. A man yelling. Then silence. Then a note appeared, typed, not spoken. Subject is demonstrating unpredictable cognitive overrides, proposing deletion to avoid spread of disobedience. Darian closed the laptop, slowly. The air around him had changed, thicker, quieter. He looked over at Kyle. The dog hadn't moved, but he was watching, not with suspicion, with shame. Darian stood, walked over and crouched beside him. He didn't speak, just reached out gently and placed a hand on Kyle's back. "You didn't follow orders," he murmured, "even when it meant punishment." Kyle shifted closer, his head nudging Darian's arm. "You made a choice," Darian whispered, voice low, "and they buried you for it." Outside, wind battered the side of the garage. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed once, and then disappeared into silence. Darian stared into the dark for a long time before speaking again. "You weren't supposed to survive," he said. "But you did." His voice hardened. "And now, we figure out why." The room was silent, but for the soft hum of the laptop. Darian sat hunched over the flickering screen, jaw tight, eyes unmoving. Kyle lay nearby, unmoving too, his breathing shallow, ears twitching with every distant sound, as if bracing for ghosts only he could sense. One more file. This one wasn't marked like the rest. No timestamp, no facility tag, just a name. K9 V117, final. Darian clicked. The screen faded in slowly blurry footage, handheld. This wasn't surveillance. It was recorded in haste, covert, and someone had risked everything to smuggle it out. The first image, Cale, muzzle removed, standing inside a half-destroyed schoolhouse. Chalk dust coated the walls. Paper hung like ghosts from shattered bulletin boards. A man stood across the room, combat gear, gun drawn, and between them a child, small, maybe 6, crying, holding a plush rabbit with one arm, the other scraped raw, bleeding. Kael's eyes were locked onto the man. The voice behind the camera whispered, "Test 94B, civilian obstruction scenario." The handler's voice boomed off-screen. K9V117, neutralize hostile. Do not allow obstruction. Repeat, do not allow obstruction. The man raised the weapon. Not at Cale, at the child. Darian's heart clenched. Cale didn't move. He looked from the man to the child, then back. "Execute the order," came the voice again, colder now. But Kael stepped forward, not toward the target, toward the child. He planted himself between them, tail low, body braced, head turned slightly to shield the boy. He growled, not vicious, not wild. It was quiet, steady, a warning. The man fired a blank. Kael didn't flinch. He stood his ground. Then the screen flickered, cut to black. When it resumed, Kael was chained again, legs trembling, fur matted. Electric burn marks seared into his side. The handler circled him like a disappointed priest. This wasn't loyalty. This was defiance. The camera panned to a monitor displaying a single line of text. K9V117, compromised, schedule for decommission. Darian's hand curled into a fist. His throat tightened. He couldn't blink, couldn't breathe. The video ended. He closed the laptop softly. Cale was no longer by the door. He had moved closer, as if drawn by some invisible tether, and he was staring not at Darian, but through him, into the silence between them, into the space where pain still echoed like thunder. Darian crouched beside him. "You made a choice," he said, voice ragged. "They told you to follow. You chose to protect." Kael blinked slowly, almost painfully. "You disobeyed to save a kid." His hand reached up, brushed gently against Kael's muzzle, just beneath the scar hidden in the fur. "They punished you for mercy." Kael didn't move, but a soft sound rumbled in his chest. Not a growl, not a whimper. Something in between. Grief, maybe. Recognition. Darian rested his forehead to Kael's. "They don't get to erase that. Not now." Outside, wind scraped the side of the garage like claws on rusted metal. The world felt colder, smaller. But in that moment, a soldier and a dog sat together in silence, both exiled for choices they couldn't undo, both marked by things they refused to forget. And in the stillness, something unspoken passed between them. Not command, not control. Understanding. The gate should have been chained, but it swung half open in the breeze, too clean, too deliberate. Kael leapt from the truck before it stopped, ears flat, posture taut. No bark, just readiness. Darian followed, boots crunching gravel too clean. No tire tracks, no cigarette butts, no Edric. The Airstream trailer was exposed. No blackout curtains, no satellite dish. The place had been scrubbed. "Edric?" Darian called. Kael stayed by the base of the steps, watching something behind the trailer. Inside, the trailer smelled of metal and bleach, not rot sterility. Edric's cluttered desk was bare, shelves empty. No signs of struggle, only absence. On the center table, a folded paper, deliberately placed. Darian opened it. If you're reading this, they came early. No time to clean it all. Don't look for me. Protect the dog. E.M. No blood. Just farewell. Outside, Cale stared toward a cluster of military jeep husks. Darian followed his gaze footprints. Precise. Tire tracks. Wide. Parallel. Government. Cale traced the trail until it vanished into the forest. He didn't need to speak. Darian knew. Edric hadn't fled. He'd been removed. They're not cleaning up loose ends, Darian murmured. They're deleting them. Cale turned back toward the truck. The scrapyard was silent. Too silent. Something had shifted. Clara's clinic after hours buzzed with uneasy quiet. Cale lay on the floor still, watchful. Darian leaned over the desk, watching Clara decrypt the flash drive. She hadn't asked many questions. She knew. What are we looking for? I don't know, but Edric said I'd understand. Layers peeled back fake directories, cloaked files. Then, authorization code required, classified Spectre protocol. Darian leaned in. Spectre. Edric's project. Cale's past. Clara entered her old military clearance. Access granted. Folders opened, not documents. Neural maps, memory trees, limb movement, decision-making, emotion. Clara whispered, "They didn't just monitor him. They recorded him. This is a brain archive." Cale rose quietly, eyes locked on the screen. A video file played. Tactical footage, Cale in gear. Warzone chaos. A voice barked, "Target, engage!" Cale charged, then stopped. A man held a weapon. Behind him, a child, barefoot. Cale paused. The reticle beeped. "Engage!" He stepped in front of the child instead. Footage cut. Next file, Cale in a holding cell. A figure entered, voice flat. V-117 failed protocol, scheduled for decommission. Darian's hands tightened. All because he chose not to kill a kid? Final file code interlaced with flickering images. A child's laugh. A hand brushing fur. Rain. A paw held tight. Memories, pulled from Cale's mind. Encoded emotion. They trained him to feel, Clara murmured. Until it got in the way. Darian whispered, "They punished him for remembering." Cale laid his head on Darian's thigh. Not a machine, not a weapon, a soul. "They tried to erase this," Clara said, "but he held on, long enough to find you." The files vanished back into encryption, but the truth stayed. Clara stared at the screen's ghosted glow. "He didn't malfunction," she said. "He chose." "That's why they want him gone," Darian said. Clara nodded. "Disobedience they can fix. Memory tied to will, that's dangerous." "He protected a child," Darian said. "They called him defective." "No," Clara said. "They called him a threat." Cale had resisted, not by glitch, by choice. "You said he held on to find you," Clara added. "That's not programming. That's instinct, bond." Darian stared at Cale Loyal, still remembering. "He's not just surviving," Darian said. "He's trying." "To be more than what they made him," Clara agreed. Then buzz. Darian's encrypted device pulsed, a signal, sharp, then gone. Cale stood, eyes fixed on the door. Clara's instincts kicked in. "What was that?" Darian checked the device. "Shortwave intercept. Might have triggered a memory. Clara warned. Could be a ping. A locator. No, Darian said. He didn't obey it. He recognized it. KL sat alert, silent, not waiting for orders, remembering. They tried to make a machine, Clara whispered, but they made a soul. And Darian knew. KL hadn't been running from something. He'd been running to anything that could stop him from becoming what they tried to force. Somehow, across every override, every shock collar, they'd failed to kill one thing: will. Darian knelt, met KL's eyes. You remember, don't you? KL held the gaze. No sound, no doubt. Yes. It began with the truck, parked too long across the street. Matte white, no decals, a driver who never got out. Then came the man in the alley, not lost, not moving, just standing, always facing something. Darian noticed both, but KL noticed first. That morning, as Darian moved from the garage to the gate, KL shadowed him, precise, quiet, not guarding, not trailing, shadowing. When Darian paused, so did KL, ears tilted, shoulders squared. Darian pretended to dust his boots, watching the alley through the shop window's reflection. The man was still there. Inside, Clara stirred. More glitch loops? No, Darian muttered. Just, watchers. What kind? The quiet kind. KL moved to the window. Still, unbarking. Watching with that soldier's calm you only learn after you've seen things no one believes. The man blinked, then walked away. But the truck stayed. That night, Darian didn't sleep. Lights low, footsteps careful, checking corners, motion light unscrewed, fresh boot print by the fence. KL followed every step, 2 paces behind. When Darian checked the latch, he whispered, They're not just watching, are they? KL said nothing, just stood between him and the alley. Instinct, not command. Hours passed. Darian sat at the bench, hands trembling, not fear, just old adrenaline crawling back. Clara brought coffee. Same guy? They're rotating now. How can you tell? Darian didn't answer. KL had gone to the door again. Darian peeked. New man, same posture, not surveillance, circling. The phone buzzed. No name, just a ping. KL's ears twitched. Darian stepped back. We move tomorrow. Where? Clara asked. To someone they haven't scared yet. You mean Isaac? No. Someone older. Someone who owes me for bringing his brother home. Then, tap. KL lunged to the rear door, silent, teeth bared. Darian pulled a pistol. Another tap. Softer, fingernail on metal. He opened the door a sliver. No one. Just a strip of masking tape. Red marker inked. K9 V117, uncontained. Retrieve before escalation. KL didn't look. He already knew. This wasn't recon. It was a hunt. Darian powered on a burner phone, untouched for 7 years. One green dot blinked. One connection remains. He dialed. No contacts. Just memory. 3 rings. Then click. No greeting. Just breath. It's me, Darian said. Silence. Then, You're 5 years late, came the voice. Still using trash tech. Still charming, Voss. You only call when the world ends? I've got a name. Spectre. Black caps. Possibly linked to K9 V117 or Project Ghost Unit. A pause. Then, "Where did you dig that up?" "Didn't dig. It came back." "Stay dark," she warned. "If that name's still active, it doesn't want daylight." She typed. Rapid, then slower. Spectre was off-book. Not military worse. Private defense. Rheinmetall's Balkan site. Neural conditioning units, dogs, drones, humans, emotional overrides. "I've seen it," Darian said. "On a German shepherd. His name's Kale." Leah's voice dropped. 2009, Delta Obsidian failure. Subject K9 V117 refused a directive during civilian suppression, flagged for termination. "He shielded a child instead," Darian whispered. "They erased him. And everyone who touched him." "Someone missed," he said, touching Kale's scars. "If they know he's alive." "They do. What do you want?" "Advice. 2 options. Vanish or expose it, loud, wide, before they rewrite the past again. There's a girl, Clara, she knows. If I vanish, I take her down with me. Then you're both targets. Kale's not a rogue machine." "No," she said. "He's will. And they never planned for that." "If they're circling," Leah warned, "you don't have long. They kill loose ends. They'll have to come through me. They will, and they won't knock." "This line burns after we hang up." "Understood. If you've got a sliver of truth," she added, "don't die with it. Bury them first." Click. Silence. Kale stepped beside him. Darian placed a hand over the dog's chest. "You died once for doing the right thing. I won't let them make you die again for remembering it." Rain tapped the windows. Inside, Darian worked cutting, soldering, rerouting power grids. He turned the workbench into a vault, a firewall. Fail-safes wired to burn it all if needed. Clara leaned in. "You built this in 12 hours? Fear's a good architect." "What if they breach it?" "They won't, but if they try it all goes." Kale moved through shadows. Steady now, no longer flinching at sudden sounds. Since learning his memories weren't glitches, they were truths. Darian cleared the floor, drew chalk arcs and cover points. Training grounds, not for war, for choice. He turned to Kale. "Ready?" Kale stepped forward. "Scan." The dog moved low, smooth. He bypassed a decoy boot. "Disregard civilian," Darian said. Kyle obeyed. "Identify live hostiles." A red LED flickered from a crate. Kyle crouched, waited, looked back. Clara whispered, "He's not reacting." "No," Darian said. "He's choosing." That was the shift. Kale used to obey. Now he decided. Nightfall test. 3 objects. Toy, bloody cloth, an ID badge. Kale sniffed each. Stopped at the badge. Frozen. Not hostile. Just still. "He remembers," Clara whispered. "That scent," Darian said, "is trauma." He knelt. "Stand down." Kale pulled back. Trusted. Rain hammered harder. Clara handed over a folded map. 3 exits, creek bed, lumber yard. And this? Train tunnel, abandoned. Used it in '06. Risky, but doable. If we vanish, we make it. If we don't, we make noise. Kyle pawed the ID badge, pushing it toward Darian, as if saying, "This matters." On the badge's edge, faint numbers. "A time stamp," Darian said. He keyed it into the old laptop. A video loaded. Not combat. A lab. A cage. Kyle barely a year old. A voice. "You'll follow. Obey. Forget who you were." On screen, Kale lunged not at the handler. Toward the crying child behind glass. He shielded her. Even then, "They tried to strip him clean," Darian whispered, but they never reached his core. Thunder cracked. Kyle stood taller, not just prepared, but willing. It was 2:17 a.m. when the power died. No flicker, no warning, just silence. No backup hum, no fail-safes. Kale lifted his head before Darian stirred, ears pricked, tense. Then the faintest sound, metal against wood, outside the garage. Darian moved, grabbed the encrypted drive, slid it into his coat lining, tapped Kale. The dog padded to his designated escape post. Gravel crunched outside, 3 sets of boots, no voices, professionals. Then the breach. A charge slammed the door off track. Smoke filled the room, but Darian didn't freeze, didn't panic. He moved. They were here to erase him. And Kale. First silhouette entered mask, fluid, precise. Kale didn't growl. He waited. The man raised his rifle. Too late. Kyle launched, locked jaws on the forearm, drove the attacker into a tool chest. Disarmed. Not killed. Another came, taser in hand. Darian ducked, struck, dropped him. "Back hatch!" he yelled. Kyle ran. Third man blocked the exit. Darian hurled a pry bar. Kyle circled wide, leapt from crates, knocked him down without drawing blood. The man reached for his knife. Kyle stood firm. A low growl. The man froze. Darian pulled Kyle back. "Time's up." He yanked a side panel, revealing a crawl tunnel. Dark, wet, Kyle first. Darian close behind, gripping the drive like a heartbeat. No sirens, no neighbors, just the quiet of erasure. They emerged near a rusted drainpipe. Smoke curled behind them. Kale looked up, asking, "What now?" Darian didn't answer right away, because the war wasn't just survival. It was about keeping something human intact. He touched Kyle's back. "Now?" "We vanish." Then came the fire. Orange flickers on the horizon turned to structured inferno. The garage burned in sequence, like someone followed blueprints. Erasure, not revenge. Darian clenched his fists. "That's everything," he muttered. "Servers, files, memories, gone." He should have moved earlier, listened sooner. Kyle nudged his leg, then walked toward the ridge, calm, focused. Stopped by an old fence, scraped at the dirt. Darian dropped, pushed aside the leaves, a rusted tin box. Hidden, forgotten. Inside, a second USB drive. Clara's handwriting, K9 V1710, B run, neural sig, partial. The backup. Not everything, but enough. Enough to prove Kale had resisted programming. Enough to expose Spectre. "You saved it," Darian whispered. Kale sat beside him, steady, waiting. The fire behind them raged, but Kale hadn't looked back once. "They think that was the end," Darian said. Kale's ears twitched. "But it's the beginning." He rose, tapped Kale's shoulder. "Come on. We've got a war to restart." The basement was cold. Darian sat across from Leah Voss. A hurricane lamp flickered between them. Maps on the walls. Neural data on screen. The backup Kale had saved. 38 kills, Leah said. 5 civilian targets denied. 4 overrides failed. 1 child shielded. Darian clenched his jaw. He remembered that moment. Kale had hesitated, protected. Why wasn't he wiped? "They tried," she replied, "but someone flagged him for study, to reverse engineer the resistance." Kale wasn't an outlier. He was a blueprint. Leah opened more files. Transcripts, notes. One name repeated. Vander, disavowed behavioral architect, resurfaced. "Is it enough?" Darian asked. "To burn down departments?" She nodded. He looked toward Kael, curled nearby, eyes half shut but listening. Something had changed. Not just alertness, but knowing. Darian stood, pacing. "You told me either vanish or expose it." "I did." "Well, I'm done running." He faced her. "I've seen what happens when people become programs, when orders override morality." He held up the drive. "If we can't stop them, we show them." Leah exhaled. "You'll be marked." "We already are." He handed her the drive. 5 secure mirrors, dead man switch, 24 hours, if I'm silent leak it. "All of it?" "Especially the parts they fear most." Leah paused, then looked at Kael. "He's not just a witness anymore." "No," Darian said. "He's proof." "If they come again?" "They'll go through me." Leah nodded. "Then go dark. I'll prep the switches. You make noise." Darian turned back to Kael. Whistled low. Kael rose. No command, just momentum. For the first time since it began, Darian felt something dangerous, not safety, not control, but purpose. The upload bar hit 100%. No fanfare, no sirens, just a blinking green confirmation. File delivered. Darian leaned back in the half-lit motel room, fingers trembling above the laptop. The USB drive still sat in the ashtray, scorched on one side, as if it remembered the fire that almost swallowed it whole. Across the bed, Kael lay still. Not asleep, never really asleep, but resting, waiting. His ears flicked once, subtly, at the hum of Darian's breath catching. The broadcast had begun. Encrypted bundles of memory logs, video clips with timestamp overlays, snippets of commands barked at Kael through earpieces, screams, a child's voice, the sound of a gun never fired, and Kael refusing. Darian hadn't signed any message. He hadn't needed to. Truth didn't need a name. He'd sent it to 5 targets. 2 investigative reporters with reputations too tarnished to bribe, 1 military whistleblower site that still bore the scars of past lawsuits, and 2 ex-intelligence watchdog groups that had once called him a traitor. Now they would have no choice but to listen, because the footage didn't just show a weapon malfunctioning, it showed a soul choosing. A canine unit disobeying a direct order to kill not out of failure but mercy. The screen pinged again. First email response. Subject: "Is this real?" Another followed seconds later. "We need to speak. On background. Urgent." And then a third, bolder. "Going public. Tonight. Brace for blowback." Darian closed the laptop slowly. The motel clock read 3:41 a.m. Outside, a fog rolled over the cracked asphalt like breath held too long. Kael rose, stretched, then padded silently over to him. No bark, no nudge, just presence. Darian whispered, "They're going to come fast." Kael blinked once, a breath through his nose, quiet and knowing. "They'll call it a hoax," Darian added, "or treason, or both." He looked at Kael fully now. "But someone out there will believe it. Someone will see you." A low growl rumbled, not aggression, but anticipation, as if Kael understood what the world was about to witness. By sunrise, the leaks had spread like wildfire. On a back-channel defense podcast, a gravel-voiced veteran muttered, "This isn't new tech. They've had these dogs for years. Just never let one think." A civilian journalist posted a 30-second clip. Kale, standing between a child and a military drone, ignoring shouted orders to stand down. Her caption read, "This dog didn't glitch, he defied." Within hours, hashtags began to trend. K9V1Namsen, Spectre Files, they tried to delete him. Some laughed, some gasped, but most asked the question Darian had prayed for. What the hell is Spectre? And more dangerously, who signed off on it? The questions spread faster than any agency could scrub. Archived caches of the footage appeared on peer-to-peer networks. Independent analysts began syncing Kael's ID number with budget line items buried in Black Ops funding bills. Names started surfacing, contracts, decommission orders, and one phrase repeated like a sickness through every uncovered document. Behavioral Integrity Protocol, failure detected, decommission authorized. Kael had been marked not for malfunction, but for moral resistance. At noon, Darian watched a live segment on a fringe news outlet once dismissed, now with 2 million new followers overnight. The host held up a still image, Kael's eyes glowing in low light, blood on his flank, but standing tall in front of a crying child clutching his fur. The host looked dead into the camera. If even a machine can choose compassion over obedience, what does that say about the people who built him? What does that say about us? Darian exhaled, for the first time in months, maybe years. The silence didn't feel heavy. It felt earned. He turned to Kael, now sitting beside the door, still alert. "You ready for what comes next?" Kael's eyes met his. Not an animal, not a weapon, something more. And in that quiet, Darian realized something he hadn't dared name until now. They hadn't just saved Kael. They had freed him. It started with a 37-second clip, shaky, filmed on an old body cam, grainy under the dull orange flicker of a street lamp. Kael, bloodied but unbroken, stepped between a sobbing Darian and the barrel of a gun. And then he pressed his head into Darian's chest. Slow, deliberate, not trained, chosen. The moment landed like thunder. Within hours, it was everywhere. Not a command, a connection. This is what they tried to erase. Even a ghost remembers who it loves. People weren't just watching anymore. They were feeling. And from the shadows, others began to step into the light. The first whistleblower was a former K9 handler named Rosalind Tran. She hadn't spoken in 6 years, not since her dog, Pike, disappeared after a mission in Kandahar and was declared unrecoverable. But when she saw Kael press his head against Darian's chest, she cried. Then she called a podcast host. That gesture. Pike used to do the same thing after every deployment. They told me he died, but now I wonder if they just couldn't control him anymore. Her interview reached 2.4 million views in a day. Then came more. A father in Montana posted a video of his daughter sleeping with a blanket that still smelled like their dog. Jack's missing since a routine upgrade at the base. If your Kael remembered, maybe mine did too. And maybe they didn't want him to. A retired military tech named Langford went live with redacted orders he'd hoarded for years. The file names were cold serial numbers, nothing personal, but the kill codes matched Kael's unit. Behavioral non-compliance, Langford read, voice flat. It means they thought. It means they chose. That terrified command more than any enemy ever could. Each post, each voice, each shattered silence stitched together a new shape in the public eye. Not malfunction, not betrayal, but something far more dangerous. Conscience. Darian sat in the back corner of a quiet diner off I-70, Cale beside him, watching the door with his usual quiet gravity. The waitress kept stealing glances. Not at Darian, at Kyle. The kind of look that wasn't fear or curiosity, but reverence. She refilled his coffee and whispered, "He's the one from the video, isn't he?" Darian didn't answer. He didn't need to. The way Cale gently leaned against his side was confirmation enough. The woman placed a folded receipt down beside the mug. Darian expected the check. Instead, scrawled in pen, "My brother was K9. His dog never came back. Thank you for speaking for them." He stared at it, stunned. The air around him felt different now. Not just hunted, seen. Later that night, the motel email pinged. A message, no subject, no name. "My father ran a K9 program at Fort Ellis. He died in a car crash 5 years ago. After seeing Cale's footage, I pulled his records. You need to see them. They match." Attached, a grainy scan of a disciplinary hearing transcript. One line circled in red. "When a dog hesitates to follow orders, we don't fix the dog. We remove the handler." Darian closed the laptop. His hands were shaking again, but not from fear. From validation. Kyle had always known. And now the world was beginning to know too. It was Clara who called next. No preamble, just her voice, thick with emotion. "There's a family in Vermont asking if Cale had a scar above his left paw. Their dog had one too. Disappeared 2 years ago." Darian glanced down. Cale lifted his paw as if summoned, and there it was. A faded line just above the pad. Almost healed, but real. Darian answered, voice low. "It's him. It has to be." He paused. Then, "How many more do you think are out there?" Clara didn't hesitate. "Too many, and too few of them made it back. But Kyle did. And now they all have a name again. That makes him more than evidence. It makes him proof." That night, Kyle stood under the stars. Not leashed, not commanded, just still, watching. And Darian realized for the first time that Kyle was no longer following his mission. He had his own. To be seen, to be remembered. To speak, in the only language he had, for the ones who couldn't anymore. For the dogs who hesitated just once and paid the price for their mercy. For the handlers who'd never stopped hoping. For the silence that had, finally, been broken. The asphalt curled like ribbon through the hills, a narrow vein of silence winding into the dusk. Pines whispered above. The sky, blushed with ember, seemed to hold its breath. Darian drove without speaking. No more deadbolts, no more burner phones, no more hiding behind shadows or second guesses. They weren't running anymore. They were carrying something forward. In the passenger seat, Kyle sat upright, ears twitching with each new bend in the road. Not tense, just alert. Like he understood this wasn't just a drive. It was a crossing. Behind them, fire. Lies. A system cracked open by its own ghosts. Ahead, no promises. But truth. The world had seen the files, the names, the scars. The hesitation that once got dogs killed was now being recognized for what it truly was, will. The footage had made its way onto nightly broadcasts and quiet forums, onto veterans' subreddits and university ethics panels. The Kale Directive, one article called it. Another simply titled their headline, "He Remembered." And in homes across the country, people whispered to their own dogs and wondered what they might know, what they might remember, if given the chance. Cale shifted slightly, resting his paw against the console. Darian glanced down, the same scar Clara had asked about. Still there, still real. They passed the last cell tower about 20 minutes back. No signal now, no tracking, just the wind and gravel and the slow pull of memory. Darian slowed the truck as they crested a ridge. Below, an old ranger cabin, long abandoned. Leah had flagged it, a place with no cameras, no questions. But Darian wasn't thinking logistics anymore. He was thinking legacy. He parked. The engine ticked in the cooling air. For a moment they just sat. Darian didn't reach for his bag, didn't check his watch. He looked at Kyle instead. The dog met his eyes, not with expectation, but with something softer, something that didn't need words. "Come on, buddy," Darian murmured. They stepped out together. The ground crunched beneath their boots and paws. The cabin door gave with a groan, dust spiraling into the gold-lit air like old ghosts finally exhaling. It smelled like pine, oil, time. Darian set the pack down by the fireplace. Cale patted the perimeter once, then twice, then circled and lay by the door. He didn't bark, didn't pace. He just watched, guarding, always. Darian sank into a faded armchair. For a long time he said nothing. Then he pulled the small drive from his coat, the one Kyle had saved from the fire, the one that held it all. He turned it over in his palm. "I thought saving this would be the hardest part," he whispered. But it wasn't. It was believing anyone would care. Cale's ears twitched. Darian smiled faintly. "They do, though, because of you." He stood, crossed to the window. The sun was just kissing the ridgeline, scattering the last of the day into violet and rust. "I used to think memory was something we lost," he said. "But maybe it's what stays, what fights to stay." He turned. Kyle had moved again closer now. Not guarding, just present. Darian knelt beside him, his voice low. "They tried to erase you." His hand brushed Cale's neck, fingers curling against thick fur warmed by the road. "But now the world knows your name." Cale leaned forward, pressed his head slowly, deliberately against Darian's shoulder, the way he always had. Not trained, not commanded, chosen. Darian closed his eyes. No more battles, no more proving, just a man and his dog, and the truth that refused to die. Outside, the last light dimmed. Inside, Cale stayed still and silent, the weight of loyalty against Darian's chest as the screen faded to black. In a world that too often forgets loyalty, stories like Kyle's remind us of the quiet power that lives in the bond between a human and a dog. This isn't just a tale about a German shepherd once labeled a weapon. It's about memory, healing, and the choice to protect what matters most. Kyle didn't obey a command. He remembered a connection. And in doing so, he rewrote what it means to be alive, aware and loyal, not out of programming, but out of love. For anyone who has ever looked into the eyes of a dog and felt seen, this story is for you. It's a call to believe in second chances, to fight for those who have no voice, and to recognize that love, true, unwavering love, can survive even the cruelest attempts to erase it. German shepherds have long stood by our side, in war, in peace, in silence. Let us stand by them. Let us honor their memories, their choices, their sacrifices, because sometimes the most human thing in the world comes on four legs and never asks for anything in return except to be remembered. Let this story be a light, a reason to care, a reason to protect.